TF2's Golden Guns, the Australian Weapons, are some of the rarest and most sought after skins in the entire game, full stop. People spend countless hours grinding through MVM in the attempt to try and pull one of these from their end of tour rewards, which very quickly, by the way, rack up the costs in MVM tickets. Others instead choose to go and spend their hard-earned cash on these items, which is the same way that I managed to acquire the ones I have. But I've never really sat and asked myself, are Australiums actually worth it? Now, I think this question has sprung to mind for me recently since I've been kind of detaching myself so much from caring about the items in the game the same way I cared about them 5 or 6 years ago. For those of you who don't know, I started my TF2 YouTube channel as a trading YouTuber trying to teach you how to all do it and go from very little in your backpack to hopefully earning quite a lot of money from it. But that's not the point. The point is I'm not a trader anymore, and recently I haven't cared as much about items as I have done in the past. So I was wondering to myself, are Australiums really worth it? Now obviously the answer to this question is all personal opinion, and I don't want anyone attacking somebody else in the comments or anything for just having a different view. I'm going to be sharing my opinion in this video, and I fully expect some people to disagree with me and think another way, which is completely fine. That is allowed. I really like that about TF2, that there's so many different things that we can talk about and have different opinions on. So I want to start a little bit about how Australiums would seem worth it to a lot of people. Now, I think the main one, especially for me, is the kind of personal value you hold on these items. I think I've said pretty much from the start that even if I do quit TF2, my Australium scattergun is basically going to stay in my inventory. Even though I could sell it if I did ever quit TF2 and make a decent amount of money off that one item, my personal value of that item is way higher than I would get just from selling it on. Like, that scattergun has a lot of sentimental value to me, and it took me ages to remember that word, and it drove me crazy. So just having that sentimental value in that scattergun makes that Australium, that item, way more worth it to me than it would be just like anybody else just looking at what the price of that item is on backpack. And I know a lot of people feel exactly the same way. There are so many people that love their Australian weapons and have had them for a very, very, very long time, and it's become part of their thing. Not sure what that thing is, but I think people understand what I meant by that point. Not only that, but at some point, Australiums were the only other option to have a weapon that wasn't exactly the stock one, other than the bot killers and the festive weapons. So war paints weren't in the game yet. There weren't really TF2 skins out there either. The Australiums were the only other really different looking item, other than obviously the festives, which changed quite a bit. So back then, it was almost like a status symbol to actually own an Australium, and it was the only other real reskin of a weapon that was completely different and people thought were really cool. I was playing the game just before Australiums got added in, so having those come out while I was still playing and while I was still new to the game, that made it really special to me, and that made me really want them, and I was very jealous of all of the people running around with Australian scatterguns, and I couldn't have one, and I was stuck with my silver bot killer. Not even the bot killers are bad, it's just I didn't have the golden one, and that's what I wanted. Because at the time, that was the best thing in the game. And that was the only other skin for the scattergun and a bunch of other weapons I liked that actually looked really different. I also think having an Australian kind of made a lot of people feel like that was something really exclusive and something really special, and that not everybody gets to experience, which is absolutely true. The first time I got my Australian scattergun, I was sitting there thinking this is really cool because not everybody in the same server as me is going to have one of these items. And I got that same feeling again when I got to borrow a golden pan, because I knew I wasn't really going to see anybody else the whole week who had one. And then I had to give it back, so, you know. Anyway, now that we've talked about all of the reasons that Australiums are probably worth it, let's talk about the reasons that some people might think Australiums aren't worth it. And I was meant to say earlier that there are some Australiums I do think are worth it, and some that I wouldn't personally get myself and wouldn't think are worth it to me. And I think a lot of people will share this same sentiment, is that some of the Australiums are just on weapons that we really don't use and that not a lot of us play the classes for. Back when I was at the peak of my trading career, I guess you could say my inventory value was the highest it had ever been. I had a collection of all of the Australian weapons. Now, that isn't a flex. I'm not meant to make you feel bad by saying that. I'm just telling you that because out of that collection of 18 or so Australian weapons, I think I used maybe 4 of them. I had the scattergun, the rocket launcher, the sniper rifle, and the SMG. They were pretty much the only 4 that I used. Because at the time, I collected the Australiums just to have them all, but I didn't ever play the classes that those Australiums were for. And having items that cost that much for classes you just don't play isn't that worth it. And that's kind of what led to my decision to sell most of the Australiums that I have, because I didn't use them, I didn't care about them, and somebody else would have valued those items a lot higher than I would. Another reason that Australiums don't feel worth it to a lot of people, and I briefly touched on it in my last point, is that these items are expensive. They cost real world money, and a fair amount of real world money for pixels in a video game. And a lot of people literally can't justify that amount of money spent on a video game where you don't even own anything physical. After that, you've just bought pixels in the game to make your gun look different. When you say it like that, it really sounds silly. I was quite lucky that when I got into TF2, I didn't really have too many financial obligations outside of playing video games and maybe sometimes going to get pizza with my friends. I was still at school. I wasn't really close to going to uni by the time I bought my Australium Weapons, but at that point, I had nothing else to spend my money on, so buying dumb items in a video game made a lot more sense. It wasn't a big risky thing to do. I wasn't throwing away money that could be used on rent. I was spending my pocket money that my dad gave me for cleaning my room. But not everybody is in that same position, so it doesn't make sense to spend that much money on an Australium. So no, when you think of it like that, it is just not worth it. And I think the main point that I do want to get across with Australiums being worth it or not is whether or not you think certain war paints look better than the Australiums do. Mainly because with war paints, you actually get way more options for customization than you do with Australiums. And most war paints can be used on most weapons. There might be a couple that still don't have war paints available on them, which is a little bit annoying, but for the most part, most items you are using will be able to have a war paint on them. That isn't the same with Australiums, and that might add to the whole point of Australiums being exclusive and why they're pretty sought after, but if you don't use those weapons, you're not going to care about the golden version of them. Whereas if you bought skins for weapons you do use, you might spend even less than an Australian would, and you would have outfitted so many more of your items. And I think that kind of thing will appeal to a lot more people than just buying one expensive item and the rest of your items still not looking too great. I do definitely think that I only think Australiums are as good as they are because when I was playing, they were the best thing that came out. But I think if I started now and there were so many war paints around, I don't think I'd care too much about Australians. I would instead just be trying to get a bunch of really cool war paints that I liked with professional killstreak on them and stuff, because a lot of the time you can still get that for cheaper than the Australian version of that weapon. Let me know in the comments what you think. Are Australians worth it, or do you think you really are never going to spend that much in a video game and would rather get something else instead? Or even if you can afford them, just want something else instead, that is also completely fine. If you enjoyed this video, please make sure you leave it a like and also subscribe to the channel if you're new. It would mean a lot. We also have a Discord link down below in the description where we're going to be doing weekly giveaways starting pretty soon. We also have a Patreon link down there if you want to support me like that, or a merch link as well if you wanted to buy yourself some Spikey Mikey merch. Anyway, thank you all so much for watching the video. I hope you all enjoyed it, and I'll see you all next time. Goodbye.